I could not believe that when I was last in America, one of the first Australian trivia facts thrown at me was, oh, you guys lost the Emu War, right? I was in shock. I was being taught about Australian history that I'd never heard about before from a foreigner who had never been on a plane before. As far as I can remember, we weren't taught about the Emu War in school, or at the very least if we were, it was snuck in there in primary school somewhere between who the Anzacs are and why we should feel sorry about the stolen generation. We didn't really get a whole lot of space to focus on the time when the emus in WA would not leave. So honestly, I knew nothing about the Emu War when I was getting asked about it in the States, but when I got home, I started to read up on it. The first thing that surprised me, even before I'd read an article, was apparently emus are everywhere. You see kangaroos all the time, and I've seen koalas on the side of the road before, but never an emu. And that's mainly because they like to live in open areas like the outback, where it's estimated between 6 to 175,000 emus live. With them being spread out over a country as big as Australia, it's not really too much of a problem, right? Well, in 1932, it was a bit of a different story. For some context, after the First World War, Australia's federal and state governments were setting up farm communities for soldiers returning home. The main goal of this was to basically stop everyone living in one cramped area and to spread communities out across the country while also increasing our own food supply and making sure our veterans had jobs. Before a lot of these farms shot up, there wasn't anything of interest to the emus on that land, so when they ran through the area while migrating to places with a more certain water supply, they would just keep going. But because there was now so much water and crops due to the farms, the emus started to stick around the farm area. This happened a few years on and off until Western Australia was hit with a drought. Because the farms now had a lot more water than any other easily accessible place, 20,000 emus descended onto the farms in the Campion region. Farmers were able to shoot and kill emus eating their crops, but with this mass migration, there were now more emus than the farmers could handle. Because of this, the government stepped in, and on November 2nd, 1932, it sent out 3 army men to solve the emu question. Solve it with 2 guns and 20,000 rounds, by the way. They weren't really given much to work with. Like, I think the Battle of Brisbane probably had more guns involved, and that was just a few Aussies complaining that the American soldiers were getting laid way more than we were. Fuck, that is way more interesting than us failing to kill a few emus, so if you have some time, look that up as well. But yeah, we really did fail to kill those emus, because I don't know if you know this, emus are freaks. These things can get up to 1.9 meters tall, and they can run at like 50 kilometers an hour. They're that fast that they could get fined for speeding in a school zone. They also communicate in this weird way by making noises with a sack on their neck, and the sound can be heard like 2 kilometers away. So if you spook one group of them, you're probably not going to have any luck getting the jump on any other emus in the area either. The other problem the Australians ran into was that, unlike whoever we fought in World War I, probably the Germans, emus don't really have a strict place that they retreat to. What would usually happen is one emu would stand out while the other birds would eat or drink. Yeah, they're called flightless birds, by the way. You know, like how a penguin's called a flightless bird? It's the same thing. Once a spotter saw any danger, they would call out to their flock, and all of them would run wildly in different directions as they tried to escape. And that was on the good days when the guns worked, because the Lewis automatics given to the emu hunters would jam at least once during this whole thing. So it's pretty obvious that they weren't sending the best of the best out there. And one jam doesn't seem like a lot when you're talking about a war, but like, this lasted not even a month and a half. Another problem that the 3 Australians ran into was that emu skin is so thick, it took a bullet in the right place to kill them, and a shot closer to, say, anywhere besides their head and neck, it wouldn't really cause a bad injury. After a couple of run-ins with the emus, the soldier in charge of the mission was quoted as saying that, "If we had a military division with the bullet carrying capacity of these birds, it would face any army in the world. They could face machine guns with the invulnerability of tanks." See, don't ever say I don't give you nothing. You got 2 voices today. An American accent and my impression of Sky from Valorant. Day on the farm, shut up. After about a week, the operation started to become widely mocked in Australia. So much so that the emu hunters were called back on November 8th to stop their fighting altogether. But as soon as they left, the reports from farmers started to pour in yet again about all of the emus coming back to eat their crops. So feeling like they needed to do something, on November 12th, the government redeployed the soldiers back to WA. After the redeployment, and just after the start of December, it was reported that 986 emus were killed on site, and another 2,500 were expected to have died later due to their injuries. But many politicians and media outlets started to say a phrase that you would never hear in Australian politics anymore, that this policy wasn't good enough. The whole campaign was ridiculed endlessly in the media and in Parliament itself, which resulted in the mission being called off on the 12th of December 1932. It was called off instead of, us losing, because it's kind of like how Americans didn't lose the war in Vietnam or Afghanistan, they just decided to stop fighting. Whether or not that means wild emus managed to win a military victory over the Australian army is, I guess, up for interpretation then, isn't it? And you know what else? It's really fucking hurtful and reductive to reduce the war down to just who won and lost, isn't it? It's about how we were there for the right reasons, fighting to protect our democracy from those dirty, long-necked sand creatures. Not about how it was politically motivated, because the Premier of Western Australia at the time relied heavily on the farmers' votes to stay in office. Maybe think twice before mocking our history, After the war in 1934, the government just started giving farmers more ammo to kill emus and even just put out a bounty on them. Sorry, I'm just realizing as I'm reading that it's like the government just went, oh, you fucking do it, I can't be bothered. So Australia to be like, I can't be fucked. Either way, through these programs, it encouraged many people to go out of their way to kill wild emus. This, mixed with expanding fence lines around farms, did also help to stop the emus getting in to eat the crops as well. And for a long period of time, there was this kind of unspoken battle between farmers and emus. The farmers asked for military intervention in dealing with the emu problem multiple times, even suggesting that they should drop bombs on the emus in 1943. Just imagine if that was the big bomb that went off that decade. But ultimately, it seems like larger fence lines seem to do the trick, and in 1999, the Environment Protection and Biodiversity Conservation Act made wild emus a protected species, making it illegal to kill any more emus. And honestly, I think that's all there is to it. I don't know why it's such a big thing. I guess just because saying emu war, that a country went to war with an animal, is kind of funny. I don't know. I think they made a movie about it, so I mean, you can watch that if you want, but like, I can't think of the last good thing that Australia has made in maybe 10 years, so I probably wouldn't bother if I was you. Is it fair that this is the one military feat that Australia is known for? Probably not. But to be fair, outside of spying on the East Timorese government, we don't really have a lot of modern day military stories. We did do a lot of war crimes in Afghanistan, but we threw the guy in jail for talking about it, so now that didn't happen, okay? Our history in wars is nowhere near to the same extent as the country I was in when I found out about the Emu War. So if you found this less interesting than most explanations on war or like just military conflicts that took place in the last 20 years, now you know why. Because we threw the guy in prison. Thank you very much for watching, subscribe if you want to see more, and keep an eye out for community polls where I ask you what the next video should be about. Have a good one, and I'll see you later.